For decades, the Indian education system has operated as a massive pressure cooker, demanding absolute perfection for millions fighting for a fraction of college seats. In 2026, that pressure fractured the entire system. A devastating leak of the NEET medical entrance exam, followed by severe grading irregularities, meant that years of intense study simply erupted into ash. This animated graph shows the historical baseline of typical exam discrepancies in India, usually a localized, manageable margin of error. But in 2026, the failure multiplied exponentially through administrative negligence. Stripping away the sheer volume leaves these stark red clusters, representing the human cost. Facing the sudden collapse of their futures, a wave of students took their own lives. The students demanded answers. Instead, they received contempt. During a Supreme Court hearing regarding the crisis, the Chief Justice of India expressed his frustration with the resulting uproar. He publicly compared protesting, unemployed youth, and digital activists to parasites and cockroaches who attack the system. If the goal was to shame the youth into silence, it backfired. Digital communications strategist Abhijit Dipke took the highest court's insult and wore it as armor. He went online and founded the Cockroach Janta Party, or CJP, a satirical political movement aimed directly at the ruling government. A demographic fractured by geography, divided by class, and overwhelming hopelessness suddenly had a unifying banner. By leaning into the absurdity of being called insects, they bypassed traditional organizing and built a highly motivated digital army overnight. On June 6th, the joke breached reality. Dipke flew back from the United States, and the CJP organized its first physical demonstration at Jantar Mantar, New Delhi's historic protest ground. The scene was entirely surreal. Hundreds of students, parents, and teachers showed up wearing giant cockroach masks. In their hands, they carried books to symbolize their constitutional right to a fair education. Beneath the satirical masks, their demand was uncompromising. They refused to leave the site until Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan resigned from his post. The authorities treated the gathering like a temporary nuisance, and when the students refused to leave, the state applied silent pressure. They switched off the streetlights. They cut off the drinking water. They waited for them to leave. But the students stayed in the dark. The government's assumption that an internet meme would evaporate under mild physical discomfort was entirely wrong. The friction only entrenched the protesters, turning a localized sit-in into a flashpoint. Then the youth gained a heavyweight ally. On June 28th, renowned engineer, environmentalist, and education reformer Sonam Wangchuk arrived at Jantar Mantar and sat down on the pavement next to the students. Wangchuk brought a lethal escalation to the sit-in. Alongside 6 student leaders, he declared an indefinite hunger strike, pledging to forego food until the education minister stepped down. By day 19, the medical reality of starvation took hold. Wangchuk lost over 20 pounds of body weight. His muscle mass deteriorated to the point where he could no longer stand or walk without assistance. Citing medical advice and a court order, Delhi police moved in on July 18th. They dismantled the barricades, forcibly removed Wangchuk from the protest site, and admitted him to a local hospital. The police action was intended to neutralize the immediate medical crisis and deflate the sit-in. Instead, dragging a starving, beloved activist away from peaceful students ignited absolute fury. The sit-in was over. The mobilization had begun. 2 days later, on July 20th, tens of thousands of enraged students flooded central Delhi. Defying explicit police orders, they launched the Sansad Chalo March, aiming their immense numbers directly at the gates of Parliament. The state recognized the threat and initiated a massive lockdown. Authorities blacked out mobile internet across the district and completely shut down major metro stations to paralyze the crowds and prevent reinforcements from arriving. At the barricades, the standoff shattered. Riot police deployed baton charges into the crowds and fired tear gas into the streets to break the human wave. Students were dragged across the asphalt. By the evening, local hospitals logged over 100 injuries between protesters and police. The chaos on the streets immediately bled into the legislature. Inside the Parliament building, the monsoon session ground to a complete halt. Opposition leaders gridlocked the chambers, demanding the education minister's dismissal before any other government business could proceed. But the ruling government refused to yield an inch. Internal sources leaked to the press that Dharmendra Pradhan would absolutely not resign. explicitly stating he would not run away from responsibility. The movement had slammed into a concrete wall. The state made its position clear. They were willing to absorb violent street clashes, hospitalizations, and a paralyzed national legislature, rather than concede to the demands of angry students. Facing the reality of mounting casualties, the CJP made a highly strategic pivot. Leadership explicitly called off all future street marches to protect the lives of their peers. But they did not go home. They retreated back to Jantar Mantar and began rebuilding their tents in the rain. The relentless pressure finally forced a fracture in the government's armor. The Prime Minister announced the creation of fast-track courts to prosecute the exam leaks, and officials agreed to compensate the families of suicide victims. With these written assurances secured, Sonam Wangchuk ended his fast on day 26. Yet the core target remains untouched. The education minister is still in office, and because of that, the students are still in the streets. This standoff challenged a persistent cultural myth. Gen Z is routinely categorized as a generation of slacktivists, content to post memes and complain from the safety of a screen. But when the state tested that assumption, these students absorbed police batons, coordinated massive logistics, and stalled the national government. They were called insects. They took the insult, printed it on a mask, and used it to force a historic debate on accountability upon the world's largest democracy. By weaponizing satire, a generation dismissed as digital parasites proved they possessed the tactical stamina to stall a state.